This is the Daily Technology Pulse podcast. Welcome aboard.
All right, welcome back to the Daily Technology Pulse podcast. It's Rick from Daily yet again, bringing you some terrific information on technology solutions for the public sector. Now today, I have got a treat for you. We're going to be chatting with someone who was a big hit at the Daily Technology Showcase. That's Will Crittenden of Racktop Systems. Will's going to talk to us today about the evolution of ransomware and how cyber storage is actually becoming a necessity these days. And who knew? But first, before we go into all that, let me just remind you, Daily is your trusted and local source for all your technology needs. You got to remember, we're more than just computers. We do a little bit, or actually a lot of different things, from audiovisual and advanced technology to client computing to managed services and print and scan. The list goes on. And you can find out all about what we do at our website, www.daily.com. That's D-A-L-Y. All right, now let's get to the main event. Again, joining us today, Will Crittenden from Racktop Systems, going to be talking to us about the evolution of ransomware. Will, welcome to the podcast, and how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you doing this afternoon, Rick?
Doing very well. Thank you very much. And always like to start out by giving a little bit of an introduction of yourself. So give us a little bit on your background, please.
Yeah, so I am currently the technology evangelist for Racktop Systems, but my background goes back about 25 years. I started my career with IP telephony. I was at a little company that was bought by Cisco that became Call Manager. So I was one of the first CCIEs back in the 90s. I went from there to EMC. I helped create the Burr, a division of EMC, after we bought Legato. The Legato networker I still have scars from. And then I went over to a little startup called VMware. I was employee number 500 or so there, helped create the BCDR division of VMware and put my name on some products like Site Recovery Manager. And then I was at Nimble Storage when they were still privately held, went from Nimble to Rubrik, and now I'm over in the cyber storage space. So pretty much if it's in a data center, I've either worked on it, broken it, fixed it a couple of times, or I helped create it.
You have to be one of the only people or very few people that I've ever heard refer to VMware as a little startup.
Yeah, right. There was back in the day when I joined, we used to get on phone calls with Diane Green and Mendel, the founders, and talk like we were brothers and sisters. I've heard more stories about Diane and Mendel in the ugly days than I could even remember.
I'm sure you have stories to tell. And we're certainly thankful that you're going to tell some of them today. Now, go ahead and tell us about what Racktop does.
Yeah, so Racktop is a cyber storage solution, and cyber storage is a term I use specifically because it's a new term. Gartner actually worked with us in this year, February of this year, to create cyber storage as a new category because what we've seen is NAS storage itself is about a 30-year-old technology, and we're still protecting it with 30-year-old security technology. In particular, it's what I like to call security through obscurity, right? The NAS platform started off, and when I say NAS, I mean unstructured data or anything that's SMB or NFS capable. And originally we had NetApp, one of the forefathers in that world, created a cheap and easy to consume platform that allowed users and developers and everybody to just dump home directories and all sorts of data there. We meant it to be very open. In the last 10 years or so, Gartner recognized that about 90% of the attacks we've seen on data, and by attacks I mean ransomware attacks or data theft, data exfiltration, have all been targeted at NAS storage. So with NAS becoming a tier 1 storage platform in the environment, Gartner said, hey, we should probably protect it a little bit better. So Racktop is a 13-year-old startup at this point, but we're a software-defined NAS solution that came from the hearts and brains of a couple of former NSA security engineers who decided that they wanted to create a platform to stop data exfiltration. And the exfiltration piece we'll talk about has become more of a focus than most people understand. But in creating that platform to stop exfiltration, we also can stop ransomware. And more importantly, we do it in real time.
Now, I have to say, having a couple of former NSA engineers, I have to think they know a little something about cyber attacks.
Yeah, and honestly, it's funny because when you talk to them, if you can imagine in the NSA and in the intelligence community and DoD side of the world, ransomware is not as big of a thing, right? I was a little bit intrigued when I first started talking to those gentlemen. I was talking about somebody getting in and hacking and encrypting my environment. And they're like, that's not even on our radar. What we're worried about is somebody taking a file home with them, or even worse, which is even harder to detect, modifying a file. I had someone in the Air Force talk about if someone were to go in and change the best practice for tire pressure on one of their aircraft, that could be hugely devastating across a fleet of aircraft. And I'm like, well, I never thought about that. I don't have to have data stolen to be detrimental.
Well, that's true. And, it really does let people know that everybody looks at this situation from a different side of things because, like you said, at NSA, that this isn't even a blip on their
Right.
radar. But yet for organizations, particularly our customers, state and local governments, K through 12, higher education, any type of cyber attack, particularly one that comes in through a user portal like email, can be beyond devastating for the entire organization. Now, I know you recently spoke at our daily technology showcase events in October. We really do appreciate you doing that. And I know you talked about the cyber storage piece, but you had a focus during your talk on ransomware. And so what I'm going to ask you is, we've seen this get more sophisticated through the years. How have you seen ransomware evolving? What's your take on it?
And this is interesting, right? It's hard to believe, but there are way more bad guys than there are good guys. That's the one thing I always like to kind of remind people. So when I talk about ransomware evolution, the first iteration we saw, the bad guys encrypted data and demanded money, right? It was pretty straightforward. The good guys or the customers said, you know what, I'm just going to recover from a backup. We went through that for a while. The bad guys got smarter. They said, hey, you know what, let's attack the backups. So that's when you started seeing things like the attack on a Veeam repository. Quite frankly, all you have to do is muck with the client file indexes, which map data to a host or a backup set. And now my recovery is completely out the window. So after the attack on backup started, then the good guys started making the backup immutable, which making the data immutable is fine. But again, if I have any access to that database that maps data to client IP addresses, host names, or backup sets, I can still corrupt the database even if it's in an immutable state. We went from there to the bad guys saying, you know what, we'll let the malware sleep 30, 60, 90 days. So now we started doing archival of backup data, holding it for 180 to 360 days. Here's the other funny thing about that. Somebody who's been in the backup space can attest to this. 90, maybe 95% of my recoveries come from the last 14 days. Now we're holding data for 180 days or longer for no business reason. And if you think about that, if I have to do a recovery from 90 days ago, how viable is that information? If I'm a transactional business, I've lost 90 days worth of transactions. One of my customers is an insurance company that generates 3,000 to 5,000 new insurance claim documents a day. If they had to go back 90 days, they would just shut their doors, right? So we started trying to combat the sleeping of the malware with holding these longer term retention policies. Now, the bad guys I'll call it roughly ransomware 4.0. The bad guys figured out, hey, while we're in the environment, let's not just sleep. Let's actually do probing and discovery. And by probing and discovery, what I mean is the first thing we saw, and this happened in SolarWinds, right? This isn't something theoretical. The solar flare attack, the user that they compromised, the first thing it did was it elevated itself in the Active Directory world. So it had more permissions to do a discovery. Once that user got the elevated privileges, it started reading through information, looking for things. For instance, think about looking for credit card numbers, social security numbers, dates of birth and names and things like that. Once it found that data, then it took upon itself to send the data out to the bad guys. We have reports that over 9 months of activity of data being sent out, without any disruption to business. So now after 9 months of losing data, the bad guys then started the encryption process or the disruption of business process. We get to the end of that period. The bad guys say, hey, we're going to stop all your business. The good guys go, that's okay. I'm going to recover from a backup. Now we've introduced the concept of extortionware. There's not just ransomware. So you don't want to pay the ransom to get your encryption keys. That's fine. But if you don't, Mr. Customer, if you don't pay for your data to be deleted, I'm going to now sell your data on the dark web. It's multi-factor jeopardy now with extortionware and ransomware. And what we've seen is extortionware becoming more profitable than ransomware, which is hard to believe. In the grand scheme of things, ransomware is the third largest economy in the world. And that always everyone kind of raises an eyebrow at that. Right?
My eyebrows are falling out.
You have the United States, you have China, and ransomware is the third largest economy in the world. It's the fastest growing software business in the world. I was at VMware when we hit number 2 in the world, number 2 in the fastest growing softwares in roughly about 10 or 12 years to get to $1 billion. It took ransomware like 2 years. So that level of money is just mind-boggling. So we've gotten ransomware up to this point where exfiltration should be what I'm worried about. And by the way, I'm still a proponent of backup. You have to have backup. You have to have the ability to recover a file if you delete it. You have to have the ability to recover from when the dumb guy on staff deletes a whole volume, right? It's just the way it is. But we have created a dependency on backup as a cyber resiliency tool, and that's not what it is. It's not what it should be, because backup is looking post-process at your environment going, hey, there's a problem yesterday. But at no point in time can backup retrieve data once it's left your building. And at the end of the day, the joke that I kind of laugh about is Coca-Cola loses its secret recipe for Coke. That's a bad day, and they're probably going to pay the ransom to get it back. But if proof of an illicit affair between one of the executives and one of the subordinate staff comes out, that ransom's going to get paid a lot faster, and it's probably going to be worth more money in the end game. So any data leakage is a bad thing. It just depends on who you are and where you are when it happens. And now we've kind of hit the next version of ransomware, which I just learned about, where there was actually no encryption. The ransomware attacked, and instead of changing anything about the metadata of the file, it just rearranged bits within a file. So it changed the file to where it was unreadable, but it didn't encrypt it. It didn't change the metadata. It didn't change the size. So now I have no anomaly detection mechanism that can tell me that's a bad file. And the only way I can get it back is to pay the bad guys for the secret decoder ring to put the blocks back in the right order.
Wow. That's mind-boggling.
Terrifying, right? And of course, while it was doing the scrambling of the file, it was exfiltrating data. So that's why, I said at the beginning, the exfiltration piece is what we should be concerned about. And Racktop's the only solution that actually has the ability to stop that.
You're absolutely correct. And it's not just the data of the executive who's having an affair. It's intellectual property, proprietary data, customer data, payment data. There's all different types of data that can come out. And if you don't know somebody's sniffing around in there, because like you said, if you don't know, if the problem doesn't present itself, you don't know the problem exists. And so you've got the ransomware or the extortionware sniffing around in there, just looking for something to export, just looking for something to share. How does Racktop stop that from happening?
So we are the storage, right? For simplicity's sake, we are the NAS storage. We are the controllers to the storage. So if you're going to access the data, the user has to send a transaction through our operating system. And what we're doing on each transaction, and when I say a transaction, a read, a write, a move, delete, a snapshot, anything, anytime you interact with it, every file or any file, we are running that through a series of assessors and grading it on a scale of 1 to 10 for simplicity's sake. So you opening a file, creating a file, renaming a file is a 1. You opening up 10 files at a time, that's a 5. 4 to 6, I'm going to throw up a red flag. I'm going to send out an alert to your security team, go, hey, Rick's doing some things in there that I don't think he should do. That security alert comes out and the security team calls you up and says, hey, why are you browsing around in the HR folder? And you're like, you know what? I got lost, right? Now I have an HR event. What's worse and scarier is they call you up and go, why are you in the HR folder? And you say, I'm on vacation. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm nowhere near my computer. That's what happened in that SolarWinds attack or solar flare. Now I know I've got a compromised user in my environment. If you take it one step further, when that transaction comes in to open up and copy a 10 gigabyte of data, that becomes a 7 to 10 on the scale. Opening up, encrypting, deleting, renaming, all in a pattern, that's a ransomware attack. That becomes a 10 on our scale. And what we do at that point is we lock the user out, we lock the IP address out the attack came from, and we lock snapshots for a known good recovery point so that at any time, and I've skipped over a couple steps, but I take a snap of every file every minute. So if an attack started at noon, I guarantee you that I've got a snapshot from 11:59 that I can bring a recovery point back from versus a backup solution where I might be losing 23 hours of data when I do a recovery. You're never losing more than 59 seconds worth of data with us.
And to me, this is one of those scenarios where most companies try to stop ransomware on the front end because it's all about training. It's all about, don't click on bad links. Don't give your username, password. And as you and I both know, as good as that is, none of it works. We're always going to get nailed. Every now and then the IT team sends out the test, you fail it. You click on somebody, I would love to join your LinkedIn network. Sure. And you just go ahead and click. And then you get the red screen that comes up and says you just failed because you didn't bother to read the URL or you didn't copy it over. So all of those best practices, as much as we like to preach about them, they're never something that is going to come in 100% fail safe. This to me sounds like the ultimate solution. And again, I'm not trying to artificially inflate this.
No.
It sounds like the ultimate solution where you don't have to worry if the users don't do what they're supposed to do because you are on the back end of things where, again, you're aiming more for the bad guys than the good guys.
Yeah. So there's a couple of points there, right? And I love the phishing training. Basically, phishing training is effective for exactly 48 hours. So after you've gone through that training and been told not to click on the Starbucks link, if I were a bad guy and knew you just ran training, I would wait 72 hours and start bombarding you with phishing emails, right? In that whole vein, somebody clicks the link. We talk about there's user-based security, there's endpoint security, there's application security, there's network security, right? If those first four worked perfectly, we never would have heard about colonial pipelines. And I'm not saying to do away with those. I want to stop people at the edge. I want to stop all that bad behavior. But at the end of the day, nobody's trying to steal your network. Nobody's trying to steal your endpoints. They're trying to steal your data, right? So you said it perfectly. We sit at the data layer. And the other problem with what we've done or what the other four pillars are doing, they're looking for known bad. And the best analogy I have there is if I told you to sit on the side of 95 or 270, pick your highway, and I told you to stop every bad car that was going down the road, one of the first questions you have is, well, what's a bad car? And I go, well, all the red cars are bad. Okay, great. I can stop the red cars perfectly. Well, what happens if a blue car is bad? You're going to let it go. That's what happens when you're just looking for known bad and 0-day attacks. Obviously, nobody knows about a 0-day attack. This new one we've seen, I don't know that we have signatures yet out in public. We're doing exactly what you said. We're stopping the users at the data, not based on signatures, not based on where you came from, not based on any of the other things, just simply how you're interacting with the data.
We certainly are not trying to tell any organization, stop your cybersecurity training, because all of that is definitely useful. But you're absolutely right. Guarding it at the data level, and I love the highway analogy. I love the car analogy because you're absolutely right. How do you know? You don't know who's a good user versus a bad user,
Right.
but you know where people shouldn't be, and you know what they shouldn't be doing.
Correct.
Because, like you said, if it's a blue car, but the person driving the blue car has 2 feet out the driver's side window where you know that they are, there are no feet controlling the pedals and they're on cruise control or they're asleep.
Right.
They're in their self-driving Tesla and they're really trying to put Mr. Musk's auto drive technology to the absolute test. Then it doesn't matter who they are. You know where they shouldn't be and what they shouldn't be doing.
And think about that too, right? That's another great point. So 60 or 70% of all the attacks we've seen, they're based on internal employees. And when I say that, they may be witting or unwitting. You could have that one user that wants to go over to a competitor, so they're going to launch an attack internal on their way out the door. Or it could be somebody that just simply didn't realize that they had downloaded malware off of a website on their work computer. But if I'm coming in and I've got your user credentials, I can access every bit of data you have privileges to. So if I'm Rick at Daily, there's nothing stopping that malware under your username from getting access to every bit of data that you have access to. That's the difference. Looking for known bad, you're a known good. And to be fair, that's zero trust, right? And I talk about this a lot. Zero trust at the data layer means I'm going to make sure you are who you say you are. I'm going to give you a 26-digit password. I'm going to give you a dual factor authentication, on and on and on. But once you're in, you have unfettered access. What I do is actually, I like to call never trust, right? Trying to come up with a new term there to differentiate. But never trust, or my founders like to say zero trust, but validate. But every single transaction is being judged before you get to the data.
I certainly can see where organizations, again, government organizations, particularly school systems, particularly, have a lot of data that they don't want accessed and they don't want to go elsewhere. And this to me is a solution that would certainly appeal to them. You talked before about the insurance company, but think of how many transactions a government organization has, anything having to do with taxes, anything having to do with motor vehicles, Department of Transportation. I mean, all of the different data points that they have. And like you said, having a data backup 2 weeks ago or even a day ago, how many are you missing?
So there's two great points. One, school systems. And it's crazy because elementary schools never used to be something we thought about needing cybersecurity, right? Elementary, middle, on and on. And it's not that the data there is super secretive, but if the teachers can't get into their data, how badly does that disrupt class? And then at some point now, almost every school system has parents' data and probably even financial information from credit cards for field trips or whatever it might be. There's data there that needs to be protected. But simply having a school system where their internal teaching or the worst case, if they have video training that's been taped and that becomes encrypted, they generally don't have the opportunity to just re-record it. So that becomes a problem. The other one, there's one going on right now. The state of Arkansas just told, I think the last report I saw was over 50% of their employees were told to work without their computer until the event was clear. Now, that encompassed real estate. So the tax entities of Arkansas, as well as DMV, and one other in particularly, they had to turn their computers off and go to paper for the last week. Think of the backlog that's going to cause. And they don't even know what has been lost yet. They're just trying to isolate the attack. So that becomes a whole nother problem. If I talk to a customer and I have these conversations often, Mr. Customer, how you feel about your ransomware response? And they're like, we got it covered. And I love that response actually, because that's when I'm like, really, please tell me, because there's millions of customers that would love to learn from you. And they say, oh, I'll just recover from a backup. Perfect. That's great. You got it covered. That's awesome. Tell me, which recovery point are you going to use? And all of a sudden you see the wheels start spinning. There's no way I can tell you that recovery point is clean from malware or ransomware until I've done a full recovery and done a forensic investigation. Recovery generally takes twice as long as backups. Right? Just kind of an industry standard. So if it takes me 12 hours to back it up, it's going to take me 24 hours to recover it, only to then start an investigation to then say, yeah, you know what? This had the malware in it too. Delete it and do it again. I've seen that take 2 weeks. Nobody goes home. 2 weeks. The staff is in an office doing recovery over and over and over again. Now, when we're in the environment, we're the attack vector. I'm going to be the very first thing that the malware hits. I'm going to tell you exactly at noon is when the malware started attacking. So I know that your recovery point is 11:59 or whatever's closest to that. So now I actually become an incident management tool as well as your NAS storage and cyber storage.
What would you say is the typical time between an attack starting and, when people start getting notified or when things start getting locked down?
With Racktop?
Yes.
1 second. And I know that sounds really silly, but we truly stop ransomware in, we say under a second, but I'll give them 1 second. The difference is I'm not waiting on a response. I'm seeing the attack at the data and I'm taking those actions and then I'm notifying you, right? So, and I'd love anybody that wants to see a demo, we'll do a demo. I can show you a live Ryuk attack against data. The important thing to think about too, Ryuk in particular can encrypt 80,000 files in a minute, roughly. 80,000 files every minute. So if you tell me you have a solution that stops it in 15 minutes, think about how deadly that is to your environment, having that many files encrypted and you don't know which files were encrypted. You have to just hunt and peck. I'm stopping that. I just ran a demo before I got on with you. 8 files were impacted out of 400. So, and it was 8 that were encrypted and that is it. So yeah, a second.
Wow.
Usually, and that's in a virtual appliance. In a physical appliance, it's usually like 3 or 4.
3 or 4. Still, 3. I can't scratch my nose in 3 or 4 seconds.
Right. 3 or 4 files were affected, and I know exactly which they were. So now, again, if I'm looking at, hey, what was stolen from my environment? I know exactly what was taken. I know exactly what needs to be recovered. And if the person's still in the building, I can stop them before they ever get to the parking lot.
And then one final question about the Racktop system. What's the typical implementation? That is one of the big constraints that we'll hear from our customers. You know, this sounds perfect, but what do I do? Do I rip out all my servers and leave them on the curb with the sign that says free to good home, or is it going to take me 2 years to get this up and running?
Yeah, I love it. So that is the beauty, right? Like I said earlier, we're software defined, and what that means is I have multiple options, so I'm very flexible. One of our more common is as a virtual appliance. I take a virtual appliance, I can run in any hypervisor, whether it be KVM or VMware or AHV or Microsoft. That virtual appliance can handle up to 380 terabytes of data, and our licensing is portable. So I don't care if you have 100 terabytes of licensing in one appliance or 101 terabyte appliances, it's the same license. But that appliance does everything. There's no difference between our deployment models, and that just runs in your current environment. If you have over 380 terabytes, or, honestly, it just depends on how large you have and what you want to do with it. But if you want to go with a physical model, I can actually put what we call a gateway in front of any block storage device. So I told you I was nimble back in the day, and I mean nimble storage. Just to be clear, I could take a nimble storage array and partition off 500 terabytes, hand that out to my gateway server, and I now have 500 terabytes of NAS cyber storage. I don't have to rip and replace, which is a huge reason. When I found out about Racktop, I loved it because the most I ever have to add is a couple of servers if I don't have storage, or if I have storage already.
So no supply chain delays. Don't have to worry that something is sitting on a ship somewhere in the Atlantic or the Pacific, or
right.
a canal somewhere.
And that's interesting too, right? Because I've got customers who want to go with a physical appliance, but for whatever reason, whether it's a supply chain and we have a couple of OEM relationships with like HPE and IBM, but in the HPE world, if I say, hey, I want to use a nimble array or Primera, Electra, whatever model the customer decides to go with, and it's going to take 60 or 90 days to get there, I can put a virtual machine in, move their most critical data to that, and then when the physical array shows up, we can migrate that all over to the new physical deployment. So I have that flexibility. Truly, I can have you up and running in the next hour if you needed me to.
Any final thoughts about where things could be going in say the next 3 to 6 to 9 months? Are the bad guys starting to pivot now because you've sort of come on the scene and given them a different good guy to fight with?
There's a reason why we aren't national names, right? We don't advertise what we do that readily because we don't want everybody knowing what we do, at least not when we get over into enemy states. The funny thing is what I thought was going to happen is what we saw this week, where encryption of data no longer becomes the end goal. it becomes more around the exfiltration. And actually, I was a little bit surprised at the decoding of messages or files. But I think what you're going to see is more of the exfiltration. One of the lines of business now, when a bad guy gets into the environment, is not exfiltrating data like we're talking about with credit card information, but exporting data about IP addresses, passwords, vulnerabilities in an environment, and then selling that to other bad guys. That's just as valuable as credit card information today. So I think that becomes part of it. I think at some point you're going to get even more boldness when it comes to those types of attacks. And unfortunately, anybody who's been attacked, I think is now going to, it used to be in the early days, it was almost a gentleman's agreement. Once somebody paid a ransom that they kind of left you alone for a while. I never understood it fully, but I think you're seeing the end of that because we're seeing multiple attacks across the same customers now becoming a more of a commonality. It's a little bit frightening when you see what they're doing.
It is a lot frightening when,
right.
when I'm just hearing about this. But again, we don't want to scare people. It's not doom and gloom, but it's be prepared.
Be prepared. And the thing that we like to talk about, right, there's only 3 stages of ransomware attack. You're either waiting to be attacked, you're being attacked, or you're recovering from an attack. That's it. And if you look at that covers the 5 stages of NIST security framework. That's where we can help you be prepared for all 5 stages.
Fascinating stuff, Will. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, that puts a pin in another episode of the Daily Technology Pulse podcast. It's been my pleasure to host, and I hope you learned as much as I did, if not more. Now, before I wrap things up, let me just throw the legalese in here. The Daily Technology Pulse podcast is produced by Daily Computers, Inc. That's our official name, in case you didn't know. No part of this podcast can be reused for any purposes without our expressed written consent. Remember, you can learn more about Daily by visiting our website, www.daly.com. That's going to do it for this episode and for me. For all of us here at Daily, this is Rick from Daily saying thanks so much for listening and have a fantastic day.